Meghan's cooking and lifestyle show, With Love, Meghan, premiered to a world full of skeptics, from the press to her critics. Despite the flurry of negative remarks, it became clear that her critics were grasping at straws. The loudest claims were that the critics hated it, but that argument didn't hold up. The idea that the critics didn't understand food and lifestyle television was hard to ignore. After all, Meghan's approach was refreshingly personal and accessible. Some argued it was an international laughingstock, but the real story told itself through the growing number of people buying Le Creuset cookware and following Meghan's entertaining tips. The constant chatter about the show's alleged failure, such as claims that it only reached number 7 on Netflix's top 10, revealed more about the critics than the show itself. It had climbed to the top 5 after all, proving that millions of people were tuning in worldwide. Amid all this noise, the Daily Mail's Amanda Platel pointed out an ironic truth. The royal family, despite their public silence, was secretly hoping for the show's success. They had much to gain if Meghan found her footing in the entertainment world. When With Love, Meghan debuted, it did so under a cloud of skepticism, particularly from Meghan's most vocal critics. Headlines were quick to declare the show a failure, claiming that the critics hated it and that it had become an international laughingstock. The louder the backlash, the more it became apparent that the true reason for this animosity was less about the quality of the show and more about Meghan's identity. Critics seemed to ignore that her cooking and lifestyle series wasn't meant to break any records or reinvent the wheel. It was meant to be an accessible, charming series where Meghan invited viewers into her life and her kitchen. Despite the negative headlines, something was happening that the detractors. People were responding to the show, positively buying Le Creuset cookware, trying new recipes, and picking up Meghan's tips for hosting. While the critics were focused on the show's perceived flaws, audiences around the world were finding inspiration in Meghan's culinary world. The supposed failure of the show seemed more and more like an exaggeration. And when critics argued that the show's position in Netflix's top 10 was a failure, it only reached number 7. They seemed to forget the bigger picture. Being in the top 10, let alone the top 5, was a monumental achievement. Millions of people around the world were watching, which was a clear sign that with Love, Meghan was far from the disaster some were hoping for. Meanwhile, the Daily Mail's Amanda Platel took a curious stance. She implied that while the royal family was publicly silent, they were privately rooting for the show's success. In her view, the palace was desperate for Meghan's success because if the show flopped, they feared what Meghan would do next. Media insiders weren't concerned about the potential failure of With Love, Meghan. In fact, there were whispers that Netflix actually benefited from the controversy surrounding Meghan's show. Publicity, both positive and negative, was good for business. It seemed to be the story of the year, drawing attention from every corner of the globe. The lack of support from Meghan's celebrity friends, such as Serena Williams, Oprah Winfrey and Amal Clooney, was a source of speculation, but that wasn't the focal point for those in the know. Even more intriguing was the silence from the palace. Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace had yet to offer any words of encouragement, leaving Meghan to navigate the media frenzy alone. And yet insiders knew that the royals secretly hoped the show would succeed. If it didn't, the ramifications would be significant, not only for Meghan's future, but also for the monarchy's carefully managed image. While Meghan's critics were loud and vocal, insiders in the entertainment industry had a different perspective. They knew that the controversy surrounding With Love, Meghan was a gift in terms of publicity. In the world of media, there's no such thing as bad publicity, and a show that garnered this much attention could only benefit Netflix in the long run. Even if the show wasn't the resounding critical success some had hoped for, it was still generating conversation across the globe, which meant people were talking about it. Netflix, it seemed, wasn't too worried about whether the show would be considered a success by traditional standards. The streaming platform had a long history of embracing shows that became popular for reasons other than critical acclaim. The fact that Meghan's show was surrounded by so much attention, both positive and negative, ensured that it would stay in the public eye for weeks, if not months. Behind the scenes, it was clear that Netflix understood the power of Meghan's celebrity and the value of keeping her in the spotlight. The lack of support from her A-list friends, including Serena Williams, Oprah Winfrey, and Amal Clooney, was notable but not catastrophic. Some speculated that these women were reluctant to get involved in the public drama, but their absence only underscored the very dynamic that Meghan had been grappling with for years. A world that viewed her with suspicion and, in some cases, disdain. On the flip side, the silence from the palace was even more telling. The royal family, who had gone to great lengths to distance themselves from Meghan and Harry, were conspicuously quiet when it came to With Love, Meghan. It was as if they were holding their breath, hoping that the show would succeed while fearing the fallout if it didn't. This muted reaction from the royals was seen by many as a strategic move, ensuring that they wouldn't be dragged into any further drama if the show failed. But deep down, insiders knew that the palace was hoping for success, not for Meghan's sake, but for their own. The royal family's desperation for Meghan's show to succeed was not only about her career, but also about what would happen if it failed. Royal experts, including Richard Eden, speculated that the success of With Love, Meghan would allow Meghan and Harry to distance themselves from royal connections, cutting any remaining ties that could lead to exploitation of their titles. The royals, of course, were desperate to avoid the alternative, a failure that would drive Meghan to potentially even greater heights of notoriety. But it wasn't just Meghan's future that concerned the royals. There was the looming fear of what would happen if the show collapsed. What would Meghan turn to next to secure her financial future? Would she find herself turning to a new project that involved more intimate details of her time with the royal family? And what about her secret diary that was rumoured to have been kept since her days within the royal fold? The royal family had always been obsessed with control, managing their image, maintaining public perception, and steering the narrative around their lives. With Meghan's departure from the UK and the rise of her Netflix show, there was a very real concern within the palace about how this would all play out. Meghan's show, despite its imperfections, represented a new chapter for her, one where she was no longer tethered to the monarchy or its expectations. The idea of her finding success without the royal family was something they couldn't ignore. Royal expert Richard Eden pointed out that if Meghan were to achieve success with Love, Meghan, she and Harry would no longer need to rely on their royal titles for money, fame, or influence. This was a terrifying prospect for the royal family. If Meghan became financially independent and self-sufficient, it would reduce the royal family's power over her. They couldn't afford to let that happen. But what would happen if the show failed? There were plenty of whispers about what could follow. Would Meghan write a memoir? Would she release a documentary about her time within the royal family? Rumours of a secret diary that Meghan had allegedly kept since joining the royal family only added fuel to the fire. The fear was palpable. If With Love, Meghan didn't work out, what other avenues could she explore to secure her future? And what would she do with all the secrets she had amassed? Inside the world of media With Love, Meghan wasn't seen as a failure at all. Instead, many industry insiders understood the situation for what it was, a high-profile series that had the potential to capitalize on its controversies and continued to drive attention. In the world of television and streaming, buzz is just as important, if not more important, than ratings or critical acclaim. The more people talked about Meghan, the more they were drawn into the show, whether they were genuinely interested in her recipes or simply following the drama surrounding her. Netflix, as one of the largest streaming platforms in the world, had a different perspective on success. The company was more concerned with engagement and visibility than with traditional measures of success. They didn't expect With Love, Meghan to be another chef's table or the Great British Bake Off. What they wanted was for the show to keep viewers talking and keep people coming back to Netflix. Even if it didn't turn into an iconic cooking show, it was a vehicle to get people onto the platform, particularly the millions who were interested in Meghan's life and perspective. For Netflix, the show wasn't just a cooking series, it was a piece of cultural capital. Despite the negative headlines, it seemed like Netflix was playing the long game, understanding that any publicity surrounding Meghan, positive or negative, would keep the show relevant in the media landscape. Some media insiders even suggested that Netflix was secretly pleased with the controversy surrounding the show, as it ensured that millions of people worldwide would be discussing it, whether they loved it or hated it. This reality was underscored by the absence of support from Meghan's famous friends. Serena Williams, Oprah Winfrey, Amal Clooney. Each of these women had once been close to Meghan, but none of them publicly rallied around her or promoted the show. While some speculated that this was due to Meghan's somewhat contentious relationships with the press, others saw it as an indication of how fraught her position had become. Meghan was no longer seen as the beloved celebrity or global darling she once was, and her show was not only a personal project, but also a symbol of her ongoing struggle for independence and visibility. Even more telling was the silence from the palace. No royal spokesperson issued a single word of encouragement or support for "With love, Meghan." In the world of the royals, silence was a form of control, and it became clear that the palace's lack of public endorsement or critique was a sign of their deep ambivalence toward Meghan's media endeavours. It wasn't that they didn't care, it was that they didn't want to make waves. They feared that any reaction, whether positive or negative, would draw even more attention to the very thing they had spent years trying to distance themselves from Meghan. While the palace may have remained outwardly silent, behind closed doors, there was a palpable fear of what might happen if, with love, Meghan succeeded. Royal experts, including Richard Eden, speculated that a successful show would allow Meghan to break free from the royals' influence entirely. If Meghan became financially independent and a fixture in the entertainment world, she would no longer need to leverage her royal connections to make money or remain relevant. This would be a massive blow to the royal family, who had spent years leveraging the Sussexes' popularity for their own brand and influence. If Meghan's show thrived, it meant that she could build a legacy all on her own, without relying on her title or the monarchy for support. Her independence would make her much less predictable and far more powerful. The idea of Meghan living and working on her own terms, without the scrutiny and control of the royal family, was a nightmare scenario for the palace. No longer could they rely on her for photo ops or favourable media coverage. No longer could they control the narrative around her life. But what if the show failed? This too presented a problem. If With Love, Meghan flopped, Meghan would be left to pick up the pieces. Would she return to her charitable work? Would she double down on public engagements? Or more concerning for the royal family, would she exploit the failure for another project? Perhaps a tell-all memoir? Courtiers whispered about Meghan's rumoured secret diary, which supposedly detailed everything from her time with the royals to her private thoughts about her relationship with Harry. If the show didn't work out, would she turn to the written word to recoup her losses? Would she tell the story of her time in the UK from her own perspective, no matter the cost? These fears became even more tangible when it was revealed that some insiders believed the royal family was terrified of what might come next. With Love, Meghan was seen as an opportunity to carve out a new path for the Duchess. But if it failed, the palace feared a public reckoning of sorts, one that they couldn't control. The spectre of another memoir hung over the royals like a dark cloud. The concept of Meghan writing a book, especially a potentially vengeful one, was something the palace dreaded. Rumours of a ticking time bomb circulated. The idea that Meghan could spill all the details about her life with the royals, just as Harry had done in Spare. The palace was terrified that Meghan might use her cooking show's failure as the catalyst for writing a tell-all book, a piece that could rival or even surpass Harry's in terms of public interest and scandal. The very thought of a book from Meghan was enough to send shivers down the spines of the courtiers. Would her words be a form of royal revenge, exposing the darkest secrets of the monarchy? The idea of a memoir from the Duchess of Sussex seemed like the worst possible outcome for a family already on edge from the media frenzy surrounding the couple. The most daunting possibility for the royal family wasn't just that Meghan's show would flop. It was that a failed show could lead to something much more dangerous. In their worst-case scenario, a public failure could prompt Meghan to write a book, much like Harry's Spare. The palace had already been rocked by Harry's memoir, but a book from Meghan with her own perspective and grievances was something they simply couldn't afford. The concept of a ticking time bomb became a talking point among royal watchers and courtiers. Meghan, who had once run a lifestyle blog, could easily turn her experiences into a tell-all book that exposed every dark secret of her time with the royal family. The idea of Meghan using her platform to attack the monarchy was a nightmare scenario for Buckingham Palace. Her words could carry significant weight, and the public was eager to hear her side of the story. The palace's fears were compounded by the fact that Meghan had always been outspoken and unapologetic. She had dealt with the media circus surrounding her with a level of grace that made it seem as if she had nothing to hide. The royal family, on the other hand, had a deep-seated fear that Meghan might decide to finally reveal the true nature of her time with them. What if her memoir was a scathing account of the behind-the-scenes drama, a mirror to Harry's Spare, but even more explosive? The possibility of another memoir, this time from Meghan, was a constant undercurrent in royal circles. After the release of Spare, Harry's controversial memoir, the royal family's anxieties turned to Meghan. Spare had been an explosive account of Harry's life, filled with intimate details of his relationship with his family, the media, and his wife, Meghan. While Harry's book had shocked the public and the palace, a book from Meghan herself was viewed as even more dangerous. The idea of Meghan penning a memoir was a source of immense fear for the royal family. If her show failed and she felt the need to retaliate, could this be the catalyst for a book that detailed her time in the UK? Would it be a scorched earth account of the palace's treatment of her and Harry? The potential for a vengeful memoir that aired the royal family's dirty laundry in a way that Harry's Spare had done was a nightmare for the institution. Meghan's memoir could delve deeper into the private workings of the monarchy, sharing secrets and stories the palace had worked hard to conceal. A book from Meghan, especially one filled with her own version of events, could capture the public's imagination in a way that Spare had done. The palace, which had spent years downplaying Meghan's importance, could no longer avoid the fact that her voice held significant weight with the public. The notion of a ticking time bomb symbolized the explosive potential of such a book, one that could turn the tide of public opinion even further against the monarchy. The narrative surrounding Meghan's potential memoir was rooted in a deeper fear that she would finally share her truth. Since 2020, there had been constant whispers about Meghan writing a book or creating a Netflix series that detailed her side of the story. This was the one thing the royals feared more than anything else. Harry's memoir had already caused enough of a stir, but Meghan's potential story was the one that could tear the family apart. The fear of a public airing of the Sussexes' grievances was more than the royals could bear. What made this fear even more frustrating for the royals was their own role in creating it. The constant public meltdowns over Meghan's every move, every word, only fueled the speculation and intrigue. Had they truly not seen this coming? If they wanted to prevent Meghan from ever writing a memoir, why did they continue to make her the subject of such intense media scrutiny? The royal family's anxiety about Meghan's potential memoir wasn't just about her revealing details of their personal lives. It was about the narrative she would create and the power that narrative would have over the public's perception of the royal family. Since 2020, the fear had been building. Meghan might one day tell her side of the story in a way that would forever change the public's view of the monarchy. And yet, what the royals failed to realize was that their own actions had played a role in shaping this fear. Every misstep, every media attack on Meghan only fueled the speculation and made her seem like a more intriguing figure. Their constant interference in her life had, ironically, created a situation where Meghan's story could not be ignored. If they truly wanted to prevent a memoir, they should have stopped reacting to every small thing Meghan did. Instead, they made her into a figure of intense public interest. But even more puzzling was the fact that Meghan had already said much of what she wanted to say. Her Netflix series, along with her Oprah interview, had given the world a glimpse into her life and her struggles. The time for a memoir, many argued, had passed. Meghan had already shared her side of the story in a way that was dignified and thoughtful. The royal family's ongoing fear of a book felt misplaced, as it was based on an outdated assumption that Meghan still harboured a desire to tear down the monarchy. The royal family's fear of Meghan's memoir was rooted not only in the details she could reveal, but in the way her narrative could reshape the public's perception of the entire institution. Since the Sussexes' exit from the UK in 2020, the royals had tried to maintain a narrative that cast Meghan as the villain and Harry as a tragic figure. They hoped that by turning public sentiment against the couple, they could regain control over the narrative. But in trying to control Meghan, they had inadvertently fueled the very narrative they feared. Every time they reacted to her actions, every time they publicly criticized her or attempted to downplay her significance, they gave her more power. The royal family had created a self-fulfilling prophecy. By continuing to stoke the fires of public scrutiny, they had made Meghan a far more compelling figure in the public imagination. Had they left her alone, Meghan's show might have simply been another lifestyle program, albeit one with a significant cultural following. Instead, their repeated interventions only fed the media frenzy, making her more and more central to the ongoing royal drama. Through it all, Meghan maintained an air of grace. Despite the uproar surrounding her cooking show, she had done nothing to provoke the kind of reaction that the royals feared. Her approach was calm and personal. She wasn't spilling secrets. She wasn't going to take down the monarchy. Meghan had dealt with her time in the UK with a remarkable amount of poise. Her desire was simple: to move on and build a life separate from the toxic forces she had left behind. Her cooking show was just that, a show about cooking and entertaining with no hidden agendas. She wasn't using it as a platform for royal revenge or as an avenue to drag the family through the mud. The royals, however, couldn't see that. They couldn't understand that Meghan wasn't interested in stirring up drama, and so their paranoia persisted, feeding into a narrative that would never be truly hers to control. In the end, the world was left watching, waiting and wondering. Would Meghan's show be a success, or would it be the final straw in a story that had already been written? The real question remained whether the royals could ever stop reacting and allow her to simply move on with her life.